Hi, having recently designed the proximity detection gauge for Kraken, I thought it'd be interesting to make a video to show how I go about actually designing and making these gauges. This was the CAD design on 2D Design. It originally had a silver surround with rivets on, but I thought I'd replace it with the normal brass version that I've used on my other gauges. So first job, remove the rivets and change the colour of the surround. It's really nice modelling it on CAD software because you can just change things, fiddle things, move things, change colours really quickly, especially with circular elements, see what it looks like. For example, this was light brown, but I wanted to see what it would look like metallic copper. So it's so easy just to change it, and I'm really pleased with that. That looks really good. So for the model version of the gauge, that's what I'm going to do. Next thing was thinking about the little coloured gem in the centre, which I like to include in lots of my designs. Rather than having one, I thought, well, you're detecting Krakens, so you want port and starboard indicators. And what better way to do them than to use coloured gems? So here's just changing the red gem into a green gem. And then that can be put over the top of the original green disc that I was just using to experiment with. I'm really happy with that. That looks really good. And I'm not happy with, what was it, yards? I think it needs to be fathoms. Fathoms has got a much more nautical feel, obviously. So I changed the title to fathoms. Now what I want to do is to actually get sizes correct. So I'm taking the outside brass section, engraved section, from one of the other gauges I had, and I'm blowing it up to fit this model. The model size is determined by things like screw sizes, brass screw sizes, and things like that I know I've got, and I can measure the size to ensure that everything does fit for the model. It's easy to forget that I'm actually making a model and not the final gauges. The nice thing about doing it photographically is that I can make gauges of any size, and I'm currently thinking about whether to introduce a range of 50mm diameter lenses. And then I thought, fathoms, the text is too long, it takes up too much space. So putting an abbreviation in, I think that looks much better. And as I say, the lovely thing about the CAD software is that you can then just move things easily. I think it looks better with the two lenses slightly further down. So just group them together, slide them over, and then move them down and center them. Whereas if I was doing sketches on paper, I'd be tempted not to go to so much effort to get it looking as good as I can. So there we are. Now we need something in the center. So I thought I would use one of the steel rivets that I've got for another project, but in the center. And I think that looks nice. It leaves more room for the Kraken drawing above it. But it needs something, so I'm going to add a brass washer, which I've got, 10mm diameter brass washer. So again, just fill the shape with the brass effect that I created earlier. And Bob's your uncle, funny's your aunt. I think that looks really nice. That's just right. Doesn't detract from the other two brass screws or anything. Now I'm checking on sizes for the actual model just to make sure and to find which screws fit. Because it's going to be a real 3D object, I want to use long brass screws so I can fix everything together. Here's the copper colour section ready to cut out on the laser cutter. And just focusing it. As I've said before, it's really important to get the focus spot on. Luckily though, I realised just in the nick of time, because I'm going to spray the engraving laminate copper to get the copper colour finish, I don't want to cut out the final shape with that because I want to be able to have room to engrave it later, if that makes any sense, with the text and things. So I've just cutting out a blank rectangle, like just slightly oversized, so I can spray it with copper paint, and then I can put it back into the laser cutter once it's dry to engrave the Kraken and the text. Cleaning it up as always with isopropyl alcohol just to get rid of any of the soot, to make sure that the paint takes. Found it's always good to hoover everything once it's in the spray booth, so to speak, simply because you just get these annoying little specks of dust which are invisible until you actually spray. Here's my little spray booth. I'm very pleased with it. It's got an air filter at the top to get dust out of air in the workshop. And I noticed that the air when I sprayed things behind that, there was no dust on it at all. So that filters the air and creates, if you like, an area of perfectly clean air. There's a cardboard section at the back that's like a big vacuum chamber that's connected to a pump to blow the smells outside, and it works really well. So we want to actually create the model. So I hadn't got the right one, I hadn't got any green ones, but I did find 2 clear ones. So obviously do the complicated thing first. I thought they could possibly be backlit and it would look really nice. So I'm sanding off the silver backing for the jewels, and it just looks rubbish. And because I'm going to photograph it from the front, I need to be able to control the illumination really carefully, and having light shining through it is going to make that difficult. So plan 2, the simplest, obvious, clever, simple design, a Sharpie, a green Sharpie. So I've got my red jewel already, my red gem, and they look perfect. They're perfectly matched. Really pleased with that. They catch the light beautifully and will look really good when it's lit for photography. Also changed the fathoms abbreviation into a more Victorian style, where they used to have underline the missing letters or the extra letters. This is filling in each letter with the red colour, so the laser cutter is going to be on a much lower setting, power setting, so it will then just burn away the copper paint and the white surface of the engraving laminate and leave the rest. The black lines around the outside, it's going to be set to a higher power, and that will then cut those out. And obviously, as you can see, I've put the red at the top first of all, so it's going to engrave it, then it's going to cut it out to make sure everything lines up and doesn't move. I think I've focused it, just finding the origin where I want it to start, which is really useful because I can efficiently use the materials that I'm cutting and not have much waste. So it's engraving the gauge lines, the markings. As you can see, some of them are slightly thicker, so the laser goes around a couple of times. Engraving letters, characters, graphics like this is so much quicker with all the little red lines inside. It can scan, it builds up the engraving with lots and lots of lines, horizontal lines, a bit like an old-fashioned television. But that takes a long time, puts quite a lot of wear on the bearings because the laser's going backwards and forwards over the same area lots of times. Whereas this way, it's cutting them far more quickly and efficiently. There you go, so it's engraved them, now it's cutting it out. And then 2 little spaces to put around the gems to hold them in place. All cleaned up. There's the 2 little spaces. Again, a nice little extra bit of relief, if you like, different heights, create interesting shadows. It's a good way to stick it down. Another good thing about super glue, if you position something accurately where you want it, capillary action will just carry the super glue underneath. And if you keep your super glue in the fridge, it preserves it because there's no moisture in the fridge, and also it means that it goes off slightly slower. The gems in again, I've just put a little dab of super glue underneath, pushing them flat because they're a bit tight in the little cutouts. That looks really good. I'm very, very pleased with that. Catches the light beautifully and gives a really nice steampunk Victorian engineering feel. So now I'm going to engrave, getting ready to engrave the piece I painted sprayed copper colour. So I'm filling in all the contours like we were talking about before, all the letters and all the graphics with contoured lines, I think 0.15 millimeters apart. And then setting it to engrave first of all, move that to the top and move the cutting one, the black lines, to the bottom. There are 3 settings for each one. There's the speed the laser moves at, the power that you set it to in percentage, and the power when it changes direction, if memory serves, which wants to be less. So focusing it, there's the piece of engraving laminate that I sprayed copper, which looks lovely. I found with the copper spray, plastic oak copper spray, and the steel spray, neither of them dry anything as well as the brass. The brass sets within an hour and you can touch it, put your finger on it, nothing shows up. The copper and steel sprays, they stay very sensitive to fingerprints or any sort of movement for days before they finally set. Don't know why. Yeah, I'm finally cutting it out. Now assembling it, I've pushed the steel rivet through and just cut out the pointer, pushed that on so I can angle it. Now I'm using two little off-the-shelf plastic spacers, M4 plastic spacers, to fix the top of the gauge to the bottom. And then the most useful, one of the most useful things I've ever bought, the chemistry lab test tube holder, whatever you call, clamp system. So useful, 1,000 uses around the home and garden. Now I want to get an illuminated effect like the clock, so I've got the little IKEA lights I've fixed above it, and I want it to shine down behind the top. Obviously I need to light the front as well to get a good photograph, a good image, so it's just getting the angles right, and it's too strong with those shadows, so I'm using a bit of tracing paper just to diffuse it a little bit. I'm pleased with that. That looks really nice. It's being caught by the gems. So now setting it up with a nice big bright light and the camera right lined up in front of it to try and remove distortion. I'm just moving the photo flood around to try and get the right effect. Here's several photos I took. So it's just getting the balance right. I want the light to appear from behind, and I want the lenses or the gems to catch it. So here's the finished design. Very pleased with that. Thanks for watching. Remember, you can buy all of these gauges and all of my other designs and inventions on my website at steamhead.co.uk.